He was a man of his times, his culture. This was the times of Islamic expansionism. They were expanding by the sword. And it was just the way that expansion had always been done in the ancient world, as we saw with the Persians and Greeks and the Romans. And so Charlemagne was following that path, and it was brutal. When the Saxons stood in his way, he beheaded 4,500 of them in a single day. 4,500 beheadings in one day. 3 years later, in 785 AD, he brought the Saxons to heel and imposed what amounted to a policy of baptism or death. This was Charlemagne's jihad, basically.
So what Bible verse did he use to justify that? Like, that would be one of those take it out of context verses that sometimes we do nowadays, is you take a verse out of context to justify whatever you want. Did he have anything that he used to justify it?
That's a great question. I haven't come across that, but a lot has been written about Charlemagne that I haven't read yet. I will be on the lookout to see if he actually did try to use scripture to justify. I suspect he just felt justified because that's the way messages were spread. And this message was important, and these people's eternal lives were at stake. And so we need to kill them to get them to believe. I mean, it's just sounds crazy to think that way. But I think if we put ourselves in the shoes, if that's all you've really known for the most part, you can kind of understand why, even though it doesn't justify the behavior. So this didn't last long, though. See, here's the good news. One of Charlemagne's contemporaries was Alcuin of York, lived from 735 to 804 AD. He was bold enough, I think he was a bishop at this time, Alcuin of York, was bold enough to write to Charlemagne directly with the following criticism, quote, "A person can be drawn into the faith, not forced into it. We must follow the example of the apostles. Let them be preachers, not plunderers. For faith arises from the will, not from compulsion." So this is what Alcuin is writing to Charlemagne to try to get him to change his ways. Alcuin was reflecting the way of Christ and the way that the earlier church had been doing it for the most part. The wisdom of scriptures, the example of the early church, the teachings of the early missionary bishops like Pope Gregory I, who had urged Augustine to use gentle means. So Charlemagne was the one who was violently out of step with the spirit of Jesus Christ, is the way that Glenn Scrivener puts it in his book, The Air We Breathe. So there's an example here in history of tension within Christendom, where you've got bad being done, but the teachings of Jesus beginning to, or returning to make an effect and make a correction to that. And I think we see that throughout the history of the church. Many failures, but then correction.